Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon. I'm the Dean of Graduate Research at Flinders University, and welcome to Vlog 37, Why Journal Rankings Are Like Vegemite. This vlog is part of a series where I've explored the key phrases in the contemporary higher education environment with regard to research, and these vlogs have come via request from the wonderful Paul, and he particularly wanted to focus on journal rankings. So Paul, it took us a while to get here, but mate, this one is for you. And my title this week is intentional, yes, involving journal rankings and Vegemite, because I have so many happy memories about serving English people Vegemite on toast. And of course, instead of actually spreading it properly like we do in Australia, they have a tendency to spread it like it is strawberry jam. Now, needless to say, they don't like it. But also there are plenty of us who absolutely love Vegemite because it's salty and all-round fab. So Vegemite really is a lot like journal rankings. Some academics are absolutely evangelical in their support for journal rankings. So they will be almost like an episode of Absolutely Fabulous. You know, journal rankings, yes, tier one, darling, tier one. So they're absolutely committed and focused on the importance of journal rankings. But some academics are absolutely the other way and are evangelical in their dismissal of how irrelevant and frankly pointless journal rankings are. Now, as is always the case, the truth is somewhere in between. And particularly on this topic this week, there's a lot of disciplinary differences between the approaches to journal rankings. Also, open access and altmetrics are cutting up, are shredding our conventional understandings of journal rankings. But to reify this argument, the harder the sciences, the harder and more committed that man or that woman is to journal rankings, and the higher the humanities, the more that scholar will think that journal rankings is guff, is nonsense. But my belief is every single discipline in higher education can learn from the truths and the priorities of other disciplines. I think we often forget we're in the learning business, we're in the knowledge business, and it's very important we learn from all sorts of colleagues in different disciplines, and we make arguments rather than assume arguments, and we think through debates and discussions. Particularly for you, for our PhD students, our research master's students, and early career researchers. And look, there is a lot of data and a huge number of data sets to verify all sorts of different positions in this journal ranking discussion. For example, the RAE, very early on in its run in the UK, evaluated the relationship between the results they gained from the peer review of humanities articles and the journal ranking of where those articles appeared. So they assessed, right, well, we read these, let's assess them via peer review and give a quality ranking, and then just map that back to see how it worked with the journal rankings. Yep. And the result of that study showed there was absolutely no relationship, no relationship in the humanities between the quality of the article as assessed by peer review and the journal ranking. So for the humanities, there is a very interesting data set there. But the discussion should not stop because there's all sorts of data sets we need to think about. So let's start with some definitions and let's look at journal rankings. Now, journal rankings are a series of strategies to help us understand the quality and the impact of a particular journal. So through academic history, there's been lots of different ways in which we have measured or assessed journals. There have been institutional assessments, national regulatory assessments, and also international validations and assessments. But the challenge was all of these different systems showed bias. Okay, so therefore in the last 20 to 30 years there has been a movement to bibliometrics, because the assumption is that bibliometrics will take the subjectivity and the bias out of this discussion. Obviously we've got to be very careful that we don't confuse empiricism and the empirical there. They are very different things. And one other variable to consider is there's lots of different ways by which we can actually construct a journal ranking. So the eigenfactor, for example, is the rating of scientific journals via the number of citations that are given to particular articles, with a weighting on where those citations come from in terms of quality journals. So you can see a bit of double dipping there. Schmargo, the journal ranking, is becoming, I think, the most popular and the most well used, and I can really recommend that to you. Go have a look at Schmargo. They base their ranking on the scientific influence of journals, and what they do is they count the number of citations and the importance of those journals from which the citations are taken. So Schmargo, very interesting, very good. There's the H index, which is about scientific productivity of individual researchers, but sometimes it's used to assess journals as well. And then this fabulous PPA, which I think is very interesting, publication power approach, particularly used in North America and the United States. And it's very interesting because the ranking of each journal is determined by the number of times that world-leading experts, tenured academics, publish in that particular journal. So it's determined by the best scholars and the frequency by which they publish in journals. How fascinating. And of course, altmetrics is coming to get us. It's going to be the biggie, and that's where journals are ranked in terms of their number of references in and through social media. There's lots of others, but I just wanted you to know that when everyone talks about this is the ranking of a journal, there are many, many ways to do that. So if you're applying for work, if you're thinking about jobs, and ranking matters in particular disciplines a lot, like business, then do ask the HR department in that university which particular ranking they favour, and make sure you can speak to that. The key argument through all these rankings, well indeed the key assumption of all these rankings, is the best journals receive the most submissions, so they can be the most selective. That's the assumption. Now the problem with that assumption is that every single journal at any point can receive an absolutely remarkable article. So it doesn't have to be the competition to get published. Great work can be and has been published anywhere. And of course, through the disintermediated process through Google, any article in any journal can be found with relative ease. But in the sciences, and in particularly the hard social sciences, and I've already mentioned business is very, very wedded to these journal rankings, guys and gals, so be aware of that. Impact factor is a proxy for measuring the quality of journal articles. Now the reason you need a proxy, as we talked about last week, is citations are a lagging indicator. So the best way to assess in some disciplines what is quality is the article has attracted citations, but that takes a lot of time to assess. So instead of taking that time, the proxy is to say, right, well, journal ranking is one way to ascertain quality work. There have been a lot of arguments in place that a generational change is occurring, and indeed it is. A range of longitudinal studies in the last 5 to 10 years have shown that early career researchers, PhD students, are searching for material in different ways. They're no longer reading the entire contents of a journal. So they're no longer sitting down and reading the contents of, say, Nature or the contents of Theory, Culture and Society. Absolutely not. What younger or early career researchers are doing is they have a keyword, they place that into Google Scholar and get the returns. Whatever journal those returns have come from doesn't matter. They read the returns and on open access. So if it's a return to their keyword, and most importantly it's available through open access, that is what is being read. So that's a radical change in behaviour and citation patterns. So the web, as you can see, is changing a great deal with regard to academic reading patterns, because these individual articles are now locked very strongly into Google Scholar. So we're not reliant on the journal. Very quickly, the articles are being cut from the journals and proliferating through the web. Also in 2013, leading international scientists signed the Declaration of Research Assessment. And this was really important, quite a powerful document and really quite courageous, I think. And these scholars argued that the deployment of a mean, the mean citations in a journal using the average rather than the median, was actually a false truth. There was no way to assess the quality of all the articles in the journal by the average on the citations. And they were right. And the greatest example I can give you of this is that one single paper in Nature, an amazing article in Nature on the sequencing of the human genome, attracted 10,000 citations. One article attracted 10,000 citations. And of course, this single article lifted Nature's journal impact factor. Now you have to argue, can one article actually have that overarching impact in terms of all the other articles that have appeared? That's why journal ranking is a real problem. And there is a more generalizable rule of thumb that the top 20 articles in any journal attract 80% of the citations. So you can see this type of pattern also starts to fold back on itself. So this means interdisciplinary scholars particularly tend to move to the journals with the higher journal ranking. We see it particularly in biomedicine and in medical journals. So rather than moving to social scientific journals or ecology, there is a movement, if you can, to the medical suite, which have higher citation rates. And fields like public health are severely disadvantaged over areas like immunology. So the journal ranking in immunology is often much higher than any of the journals in public health. So this means there is a skew to articles moving to fields like immunology. Professor Brendan Crabb, a great guy, offered a really powerful reminder, I think, to all of us as we get so overwhelmed with this journal ranking information. And he stated, quote, "What matters is the quality of the article itself. Let's not get too hung up on where it is published." End of quote. Now, you're going to hear a lot of phrases that are connected with journal ranking. And the most common is the JIF, the Journal Impact Factor. This was originally developed just to help scholars like us, help researchers think about where perhaps we could publish our work, to get some data to help us make those decisions. But the problem is now the JIF is being used as a proxy for the value of the research and indeed the prestige of the researcher in the journal. It was never meant to be used this way. So the impact factor of a journal is a simple average, guys. It looks at the citations to the articles in the journal over a particular period of time, and then it averages those citations. So journal impact factor can be used incredibly well to measure, say, a journal's prestige, or to help librarians manage their subscriptions, what would be a good journal for us to subscribe to. And also for researchers to say, right, well, let's have a look. What is the average citation rate in that journal? Is that something I should consider? All of that is a fantastic use of the JIF. The JIF is more problematically deployed to evaluate the impact of individual articles, has nothing to do with that at all, or more importantly, to compare journals between different disciplines. This is just crazy stuff. So you've got a JIF in cultural studies and you've got a JIF in biomed, and what? You're assessing those two journals? Really completely pointless. Bad mathematics. Also, if funding agencies are making these sort of grants on the basis of the GIF, again, completely pointless because it's done on the average citations of the journal articles. And also, there are many things that we as scholars should assess when we're thinking about where our publications should go. One of them is the GIF, but also an important one is the audience. Who do you want to read this work? So a key problem that is emerging in particular disciplines, and I'm thinking, say, law, Indigenous studies and Australian studies in particular, is that the local, the regional and the national journals are often the appropriate place for you to put your research in terms of the people who read it, but they actually have a low journal ranking for the publications in this field. Really problematic. So Jim Corky and Bernard McCabe in 2014 actually used the statement that the journal ranking was having a, quote, harmful impact on law research, end of quote, harmful impact. So the reason why they're having a harmful impact on local, regional, national paradigms is because journal rankings assess international significance. So national studies, provincial studies, state-based studies in law, in history, in Indigenous studies in particular, suffer from these types of journal rankings. Now, this is a problem. This is a real problem. I would never, as a scholar, as a researcher, say, oh, right, well, let's not research Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, Canada, Malaysia, Singapore, because after all, the journals that you'd be publishing in probably wouldn't have a very high GIF or a high ranking. Now, just because it's difficult to move these studies from local journals to international journals doesn't mean that that research isn't incredibly important. And Jenny Hobson and Megan Hill did a fantastic study, an article showing the problems involved in publishing Māori research in particular. So the journals that tended to publish Māori research are actually ranked quite low in this journal ranking paradigm, yeah? And if one was to move Māori research into the higher impact journals, then who exactly would the audience for that Māori research be? So these great scholars brilliantly proposed what they called the Māori Journal Rankings Project, the Māori Journals Ranking Project, where they argued, right, well, we're going to rank the journals in terms of its appropriateness for Māori research. Now, there is a clear example, I believe, of post-colonialism in practice. So journal rankings do show a profound bias for publications for research in the English language and also publications based in North America and in Europe. Now, I've lived in Europe, I've lived in North America, wonderful places to be, live, think, create, wonderful scholars there, and you know, I probably will go back there in the next few years, wonderful places. But let me just put in a very special statement for scholars working in this part of the world, where we are now. It's incredibly important, I would argue, for scholars who live, work, think, create in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, that we research our lives, our narratives, our history, our environment. Regardless of the journal ranking, we matter, this part of the planet matters, and the research we conduct here matters. Also, very specialist areas in international scholarship and specialist journals do suffer in terms of this ranking. But why I love journal rankings, and as someone who works in the humanities but also through the social sciences and some of the science areas, I love talking about journal rankings. I don't dismiss them because I think all of us need to ask ourselves very often, what are we doing here? What's our audience? Why do we care so much about research? Why does what we do on a daily basis matter? And I think journal rankings really help us make those determinations. And Dennis Turish in 2015 made a fantastic statement that I actually have on my office wall. And he stated, quote, "Publishing surely must be about having interesting ideas, writing well, addressing real world problems, and making a difference. End of quote. That's it, isn't it? That's a great statement, and it's a great point. And there is no doubt that the world is changing. Research is changing, and researchers are changing. So what I would recommend to you is please go have a look at Schmargo. Look at that journal ranking. Look at how they're doing it. Look at the national inflection on those journal rankings. Very interesting information. I do want you to consider that when you are thinking about where you are going to publish. What I want you to do though is gather all the best information you can that's current, that's edgy, that's interesting about who you are as a scholar and where your publications should be published. Journal rankings, that's certainly one bit of information you must consider, but the quality of the research matters. In fact, the quality of the research really is all that matters. The question is how we determine that quality. And then the next question is how digitization is cutting up and transforming what we do in research. I hope the vlog has been useful today. Journal rankings big, journal rankings important. And as always, I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.